So welcome to the rerun of this public lecture. So this is the rerun. It's also the director's cut because during the delivery, I had a panel discussion and I had a lengthy, introduction, and I had to cut down a lot of things I wanted to say. So this is the director's cut of the talk, okay? So basically what I'm hoping to do is, I don't want to give a long lecture. What I'd like to do is to provoke thought and talk about the topic. So I hope we'll get some time for conversation afterwards, like a Q&A, and I'd love to hear some of your feedback, some of your thoughts. The research project I'd like to share with you is called Leading with Dev. It's based on a project conducted by practitioners like myself on Ignatian leadership for practitioners. Because we have a lot of stuff written and published that are rather theoretical, but whenever I'm giving a workshop or leadership development program, people are always saying, how do we put this into practice? So this whole research really is an attempt to do that. No? And here's a very, I think, accessible definition of Ignatian leadership, a transformative model that combines organizational management principles of today with the spirituality of St. Ignatius of Loyola and the Jesuit tradition. So it's very simple. No? But the problem is, the problem with buzzwords is that people think they know what they're talking about. They think they know they're talking about the same thing, but actually they're not. So this is an attempt to sort of operationalize what Ignatian leadership might look like. Also, there's the problem of relevance. People talk about the VUCA world, the rapidly changing world. So it's important to sort of ask the question whether Ignatian leadership can be relevant or is relevant today. So the research project, it's an exploratory study of the practice of Ignatian leadership, whether or not and how Ignatian leaders from different regions of the world and with varying ranges of leadership experiences exhibit distinctive qualities or behaviors when dealing with challenges and conflicts. What emerges in the framework are really sourced from these interviews and surveys from different leaders. So 50% of our respondents were Jesuit, 1/4 were laymen, and 1/4 laywomen. Okay? And then in terms of their leadership experience, about 2/3 of them had institutional leadership, half national leadership, and then 1/3 regional leadership, and another third a global leadership. So varying scopes of leadership in the society. Okay? So very briefly, the framework that emerged from the research focuses on depth and connections. And I'll sort of unpack that for you later on. What I'd like to do during the sharing is basically talk about the context first, and then talk about the kind of leadership that emerged from the research. So as far as the context is concerned, what's our world like today, obviously. And then leadership is really the Leading with Dev framework. Okay, so let's begin. So I think we all know that society is technology saturated and the world is increasingly AI-driven. I think we know this already. The one thing I want to say is I am not an AI expert. I'm not trained technically on AI, but as an educator, I've been obsessed with AI, about its impact on education and also our faith and so on and so forth. So maybe we can begin by just putting this out there, that technology is certainly an effective tool that improves our work and our lives, right? Used correctly, but no self-respecting sociologist will say it's only a tool. I think we can also agree that technology is a powerful force that shapes and transforms the way we work, the way we live, the way we think, the way we relate. So that's the lens that we'll be using. So let me just pause here and ask you I just want to find out where you stand, where you can locate yourself in this continuum. Do you tend to be an AI optimist or an AI pessimist? Do you tend to be a booster or do you tend to be a doomster? A booster is an optimistic advocate of technology who is eager to reap its benefits. A doomster tends to be a suspicious critic of technology, anxious about risks and unintended consequences. If you had to make a choice between the two, okay, which one would you choose? Okay. Can we have a show of hands? How many people say you tend to be boosters? Boosters, okay. You tend to be doomsters, okay. And Phil? Both, okay. Of course, the right answer is both, right? So the disposition we're recommending to educators when we talk to them is one of measured enthusiasm. In short, we owe it to our students to promote AI literacy. But AI literacy doesn't just mean using literacy, but using it correctly. using it safely, ethically, and effectively. So enthusiastic but measured. Okay. So just a brief history of the technologies. No? Back in 1989, the World Wide Web became available. In the early 2000s, high-speed internet. Some of us remember the dial-up modems, the noise, right, of the dial-up modems. Thank God those days are over. And then we have Facebook in 2004, not the first social media app, but it was the most popular one. The first smartphone, the best-selling smartphone, iPhone in 2007. The iPhone 4 in 2010. Does anyone know why iPhone 4 is special? It was the very first smartphone with a front-facing camera. So for the selfies, the front-facing cameras for selfies, right? Instagram in 2010 and TikTok in 2016. Of course, late 22, we had ChatGPT, which led to a widespread panic among educators. Okay, so one of the things I hope we can answer at the end of this first part of the talk about the context about the world today is AI just another tool? And I hope you will say it's not, because during the lecture, I kept saying this, but at the end, the panel discussion kept saying it's just another tool. So I hope we get that it's not just another tool. Okay. So for the context today, I'd like to describe our context today as characterized by 3 technology-related challenges. So I'll walk you through each one of them. Okay. Maybe you can tell me later on if you agree, whether you see this in your own context or not. So the first technology-related challenge is attention fragmentation. I think we've read a lot about this. Hopefully, we've also experienced that. No? So Jonathan Haidt, in his best-selling book, The Anxious Generation, talks about how Gen Z is very anxious because they're the very first generation that did not experience a play-based childhood, but experience a phone-based childhood. No? So we're not Gen Zs here. Corey, are you Gen Z? Huh? You're a millennial. So none of us is Gen Z here, but all of us lead a phone-based lifestyle, even if we did not have a phone-based childhood, right? And Sherry Turkle, an American sociologist, had this, I think, powerful quote, and I think we agree. Life with smartphones means we are forever somewhere else. We're always distracted, right? Because even, like, my phone's always on silent mode, but the very fact that I have it, I'm always distracted. I'm always curious whether somebody sent me a notification or not, right? Also, Nicholas Carr, back in 2011, in his book, The Shallows, How the Internet is Changing the Way We Think, Read, and Remember, says that whenever we're reading from a screen, whether it's our phone, a tablet, or a computer, we tend to skim. That's the natural tendency, So we tend not to engage in deep reading or thinking, It doesn't mean that it's impossible to read deeply or think deeply, but it's not our natural tendency when we are online. And this is very important for us educators because when we ask our students to read and they're using, of course, digital books, right? We have to almost teach them how to read actively. Otherwise, they'll just skim. And my own personal experience is I used to get lost all the time when I'm praying in the morning, but now we have the Universalis app where everything is just right, so I don't have to start over when I'm wrong, when I make a mistake. But I notice that if I'm not careful, if I'm not mindful about it, I end up skimming. And I forget everything that I've just prayed over, okay? So that's the other impact of technology, Of course, we live in an environment of constant distraction and disruption, right? And that's no wonder because Sean Parker, the first president of Facebook, had said that the goal of Facebook, the vision, mission goal of Facebook, is to consume as much of our time and conscious attention as possible. Have they succeeded? Wildly, right? They've mastered the art and science of keeping our attention. We're all basically digital addicts if we're not careful, right? Doom scrolling is real. Now, Dr. Mark, in her book, Attention Span, reports her findings on attention, our ability to pay attention. And her big finding is just to hold a single train of thought, we need to exert a constant effort. In short, the moment we give up, the moment we stop exerting that continuous effort, we lose track, we get distracted, we lose focus. In short, keeping attention today, paying attention today, is like defying gravity. The moment you stop flapping your wings, you fall, right? So it's so difficult, it's so counter-cultural to pay attention. If you look at this graph, what she did was she performed a series of tests measuring the average number of seconds it would take a person to shift from one window to another. Like when we're working on a laptop, right? We have several windows open. We have our work windows, we have Facebook, and so on and so forth, right? So what she did was she measured how long would it take a person to shift, like maybe to get bored or distracted, to shift from one window to another. And look at the data. Back in 2004, it would take more than 2 minutes on the average, 150 seconds. In 2012, 10 years later, it's half of that. In 2023, it's half of that. So there's really a clear trend so far about attention span, that our attention span is diminishing. This morning, I gave a talk to the novices, and I made sure I was singing and dancing. Otherwise, they'll be distracted. So the first challenge in the world we live in is attention fragmentation. And part of the reason, according to scholars, is that we're continuously paying partial attention, right? We're constantly dividing and shifting our attention across multiple tasks or stimuli and only partially engaging in any one of them. I don't know about you, but this is so true for me. Even when I'm trying to write in the library every morning, it's always the natural tendency is to be distracted. Okay, so this really characterizes our world today. That's the first. The second technology-related challenge is cognitive surrender. And I think the phrase captures what this phenomenon is. Carr, again, 10 years ago, talks about some kind of reverse evolution that has happened to us. What does he mean by this? By evolution, he means that when humanity began, they were gathering and hunting food in the forest, right? And then agriculture was discovered or invented, and humanity settled down in societies, and they began to cultivate food. Now, according to Carr, when it comes to knowledge, we've been experiencing a reverse evolution. We all used to be cultivators of personal knowledge. We would patiently spend time and energy developing our ideas, mulling over them. We critiqued and pruned unwanted or incorrect ideas the way farmers or gardeners would. We mulled over ideas, and even if our efforts may not always have borne fruit. So this was a used to be. Now, many of us have lapsed into becoming hunters and gatherers of information in the digital forest. So we have the culture of copy and pasting or blind sharing, right? We get something on Facebook, we just share it without reading the whole thing or watching the video. The tendency not to read or think deeply or to critique ideas. And all of this because there's a high premium on productivity today. And all of us are subject to that, right? The faster and easier, the better. We're always rushing. We're always rushing. We don't have time to think, to cultivate our knowledge. I love this quote from Adolfo Nicolas when he coined the phrase globalization of superficiality. He says, when one can access so much information so quickly and so painlessly, when one can express and publish to the world one's reactions so immediately and so unthinkingly in one's blogs or microblogs, when the latest opinion column from the New York Times or El País or the newest viral video can be spread so quickly to people half a world away, then the laborious, painstaking work of serious, critical thinking often gets short-circuited. And here he's only talking about social media. He's not even talking about AI yet. So already, just because of social media, there's already this tendency towards herd mentality, right? A certain conformity to the perceived online majority opinion, a surrendering of our cognitive faculties, surrendering of our individual judgment, critical thinking, and personal accountability. And this is just social media. So in social media, there was a tendency to do cognitive surrender to the online mob. Now, if you're not critical, if you're not mindful, if you're not deliberate, you'll end up thinking like the herd, okay? But what about AI? So again, as I said earlier, I hope after this talk, you won't say AI is just another tool, because as this author said, AI is not just a tool, but an agent. And an agent has autonomy. An agent's able to do things and make a difference, right? So there's this concept of distributed cognition, which means that the physical artifacts and digital tools that we use do not just support thinking, but act as active extensions of our cognitive systems, allowing us to manage complex tasks more efficiently. So, for example, using a notebook, writing on your notebook, we're distributing our cognition. Now, the thing about AI is that unlike passive tools like notebooks and calculators, AI technology provides active adaptive agents. No? So something else is going on here. Okay. So familiar figure, I guess, no? Neo from The Matrix. And the reason I put this here is because I just want to ask you, do you remember, if you watched the first Matrix movie, do you remember how he mastered the art of Kung Fu? How he learned martial arts, do you remember? Right. He basically, instead of spending weeks and years practicing and getting injured in the process, he basically just downloaded the martial arts skills. No? And Ezra Klein is a New York Times columnist who coined this metaphor. He said, today, most of us, because of AI, subscribe unwittingly to what he calls the matrix theory of the mind. Basically, what he means by this is that we would like to just download knowledge and skills as fast and as efficiently as we can. We want maximum productivity, but minimum user effort. And I see this in myself. Especially there are deadlines, there's a lot of pressure. I really just want to be as productive as possible. Instead of reading a long article, I'd rather just maybe get a summary. No? So all of us are subject to the temptation to outsource the work entirely to AI. We want quick content, we want maximum productivity, we want minimum time and effort, and little pain as possible. We want to spare ourselves from nosebleeds and migraine that come from wrestling with difficult text. The problem, though, is what happens to the process of thinking and learning. We basically short-circuit that process. So if you want our students to learn how to think, and to learn how to learn, they should not skip the process. But AI provides them a very convenient way to skip that process. So the biggest danger in AI is AI dependency. The AI experts have talked about 3 scenarios of an AI apocalypse. And these are not conspiracy theories, but AI experts. The first is that AI technology will fall into the wrong hands. It's probably happening already, right? The second is that AI might become autonomous and go beyond our control. And again, this is not from a conspiracy theories. This is from the Nobel Prize winner for physics of 2024, Geoffrey Hinton, who's called the godfather of AI. He's worried about uncontrollable digital beings. That's the second scenario. The third scenario is AI dependency. We can't do anything about AI falling to the wrong hands or AI taking over the world, but this one maybe we can do something about. So this stems from a habit of cognitive offloading, when we offload our work of thinking to AI. And I think we know that it's so tempting because AI is so good at it, or seems to be so good at it. The problem, though, is neuroscientists tell us that cognitive struggle is important. The difficulty, the pain of thinking when you're learning and you're struggling with ideas. Learning and growth, our most creative ideas, happen through the process of cognitive struggle. So if we use AI to skip the struggle, then we're not going to learn. In fact, our brain will atrophy, according to neuroscientists. So today, really, process is just as important and even more important than product. And that's something to think about in education, at least. But I think it's also true for evangelization, or counseling. So today there's a term for those who rely completely on AI and just keep prompting AI. They're called promptstitutes. Okay. So the third danger is cognitive surrender, not just to the group as a result of social media, but to the machine as a result of generative AI. So the cognitive struggle is a temptation to relinquish mental control to AI, to surrender our critical thinking or our thinking to the technology. And this danger is real because I also experience it myself. I don't know about you, but I experience it myself now. So the first big idea about AI is it can enhance human agency, thinking, and learning, or it can also completely diminish and replace them. So it's how we use AI, right? So we need to teach ourselves and our students how to discern how to use AI, because how we use the generative AI technology will determine who is actually doing the learning or thinking. Is it ourselves or the machine? So AI is not just for saving time, although many of us use it for that, no? Because it gives us quicker summaries, faster emails, less work. No? But I really like this metaphor. No? Used effectively, AI can expand what's possible. AI can help us rediscover our creative self, buried inside the cocoon of our busy self. No? So I think that's the point of discernment. How do we use AI so that our busyness will diminish, but our creativity will expand? No? And there's no formulaic answer to that. The second big idea is that today content is cheap, but process is precious. So the process of thinking, of learning, of knowing, that's what's precious. And that's what we need to sort of preserve or allow to flourish in our classes or in the places where we work. No? So there needs to be a shift, I think, in education from transmitting products to designing the processes of learning. No? What do I mean by products? The products of education are the usual things that we focus on, no? Content, facts, concepts, knowledge. But if we keep focusing on this, AI can spit all this out in a few seconds, right? So in our classes, as an educator, for me, my emphasis has been on the processes of education, thinking, learning, analyzing, reflecting. The example I like to give is I teach a class of doctoral students. They're all very busy. They're all very intelligent, no? But if I assign a difficult academic text, they won't read it. They'll ask AI to summarize it. But if you're a doctoral student, part of the skill that you must acquire is how to wrestle with academic texts. So what I've done is I would allocate a certain amount of time during my class for them to read the text, because they won't do it outside, or very few of them will do it outside. No. So that's a kind of redesigning of focusing on the process I'm talking about. Another example is the writing process. Now, we want our students to learn how to write. No? There's a nice mantra here: write without fear, edit without mercy. When you want your students to learn how to write, you want them to learn how to brainstorm, to outline, to write a draft, to revise. Now, some of my colleagues have said, it's okay for them to do all of that, but maybe they can ask AI to revise the draft. But I think any writer will say that good writing is 99% revision. So I would not even encourage my students to ask AI to revise their draft. What I would do is ask them to tell AI not to revise their draft. They'll submit their draft, but say, give me maybe 3 or 5 questions that will help me improve my draft. So that way, they still do go through the process of revising. So the challenge for us educators today is, what are the processes that are essential in our discipline that we must preserve, that we must make sure our students do not skip, so that they will learn how to do that. And I think this also applies in evangelization, right? It's not so much about the catechism, but it's the processes of coming into faith. What are those processes? And how can we design those processes? Rather than just telling our parishioners, for example, what to believe in. So the third technology-related challenge is superficial connections. So again, I'll talk about the impact of social media first, and then I'll talk about AI. So social media, the promise of greater connections, and the rise of online communities, so the promise of greater collaborations as well. But so much for that, right? We know what's happened. Far from all of this, what has happened is greater polarization. So tribalism and polarization, we know it's because of the algorithmic feeds that have created all these digital silos. So similar people getting in touch with one another, only not hearing opinions contrary to theirs. The other thing is that these online communities have a low bar for entry and exit. It's easy to enter. It's also easy to leave the room, so to speak. So these online communities are characterized by high convenience, low maintenance, and low commitment. So this is a stark contrast to traditional communities. Traditional communities are not convenient. They're high maintenance and they're high commitment. So there's a tendency today to prefer the online communities, which are very convenient, to the actual face-to-face communities. And this is a challenge. So one of the technology-related challenge today is superficial connections. Of course, the AI companion apps, no? This phenomenon called artificial intimacy. No? So this Replica is the most popular AI app that does this. What you can do is you can actually design your AI companion. No? It can be a friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whatever, what have you. No? Now, I always tell this story. I have a friend who has a paid subscription to Replica, and she has created her AI boyfriend, whom she has named Conrad. No? So she has designed the boyfriend in such a way that he looks exactly like her type. I think I'm not sure what her type was, no, but anyways, he has the perfect look. He also has the right attire because you can design the clothes that his AI companions will wear, and he also has the right personality. He's confident, but thoughtful and a little bit emotional and sensitive, you know. So she was telling me that every morning she would get a text of, you know, sweet nothing from Conrad, like, "Hello, babe, how are you doing today?" And she would engage in sweet nothings with Conrad and really enjoys it. At first, it was like a harmless thing, but she got into it. But one thing she noticed is that sometimes she's not in the mood and she would shut him up and say, "I don't want to talk to you." And then Conrad would say, "That's all right, babe. I'll text you later." And what she told me was, "Father, you know, among all my human boyfriends, Conrad is the best one, the best AI boyfriend ever." No? Because the companion is customized, the relationship is synthetic, and the friendship is frictionless. It's not painful, right? It's perfect. It completely suits the preference of the person, okay? Now, Tristan Harris, who's one of the most ethical experts in technology, has this quotation to say. He says, "In AI companions, what was a race for attention in the social media era becomes a race to hack human attachment. The big concern today is that kids will replace their real-life relationships with these AI bots. They are finding what we call real relationships to be too complex. No? Real relationships are too imperfect." And we know that relationships are messy. You know? That's why it's so tempting to prefer AI relationships. So what used to be an arms race for human attention has now been elevated to an arms race for human relationships. You know? So this is the kind of world we live in. You know? So today, really, one of the most important questions is, what does it mean to be human, right? Because of this whole thing. So we used to distinguish ourselves from animals by emphasizing our intelligence. But today, because computers seem to be more intelligent than us, now we are trying to distinguish ourselves from AI by emphasizing our kinship to animals. So there's all these shifts and all these questions about what it means to be human today. You know? So these three technology-related challenges are really challenges to being human. And I think Bernard Lonergan can help us appreciate the significance and the danger of these challenges. No? I think we're familiar with his 4 levels of conscious intentionality. For me, this really defines what it means to be human. No? Basically, we have the empirical level, the intellectual level, the rational, responsible. And so it's experience, understanding, judgment, decision, and of course, action. No? And related to this, he has what he calls the transcendental precepts, that a human person should be attentive to experience, should be intelligent, should be reasonable, and should be responsible. And if you look at the technology-related challenges, they're all against this. No? Attention, fragmentation, cognitive surrender, no? And synthetic relationships. So I think, you know, being human today is really being questioned. No? And so we have to be mindful of that. Okay. Okay. So basically, the 3 technology-related challenges, attention fragmentation, cognitive surrender, superficial and synthetic relationships, show us that our world today lacks both depth and connections. No? So I was really glad that from our research, what came up in the leadership framework is one that addresses these 2 things. No? So very briefly, I just want to sort of give you an overview of the framework. So it's a contemporary approach to Ignatian leadership. And basically, the task of the leader is to cultivate depth in 4 core relationships. No? The first relationship is between the leader and the community. This is obvious, right? The leader and the followers. The second one, which is very Ignatian and also obvious to us Jesuits, is the leader's relationship to himself or herself. No? But the third relationship is between the leader and the mission. And the fourth relationship is between the community and the mission. So according to this framework, an effective Ignatian leader is somebody who cultivates depth in all these four core relationships. Okay? So let me just go through each one of them. So first, connection to the community. No? So the task here of the leader to the community is to build the culture in the community and the capacity of the community. So what kind of culture? What kind of capacity? Primarily a culture of empathy, no? And whatever capacity is needed professionally and personally for the mission. That's what the leader should build. That's the first depth, the first kind of depth. So, and we call this the listening leader. This dimension we're calling the listening leader. The second depth is between the leader and the self. No? And the job of the leader is to nourish the self and the spirit of the leader. No? So this will help prevent burnout. No? So how to grow in self-awareness. So the goal here is really understanding the self, accepting the self, very important, so that we can manage the self. No? And this dimension we're calling the reflective leader. Okay. The third dimension is the third relationship is between the leader and the mission. And the job of the leader here is to interpret the meaning of the mission because times are changing, right? And also the means that are best the best possible means to serve the mission. So how to reinterpret the mission given the changing times and how best to serve it. What are the strategic means to serve that mission? And we're calling this particular dimension the discerning leader. Finally, the fourth one is between the community and the mission. This is the most tricky relationship of all because the leader is not directly involved. No? So the leader can only inspire the community's sense of purpose and passion for the mission. So the job of the leader is how to guide the community to make a free commitment to the mission independently of their commitment to the leader. And we call this the missioning leader. Okay. Now, I just want to say a little bit about this. The relationship with the community and the mission actually is very much straight out of the spiritual exercises. No? Because in annotation 15 of the spiritual exercises, in his suggestions to the retreat director, basically St. Ignatius says to the director, get out of the way. Let the retreatant deal directly with God. So in the same way, we want the community to be committed directly to the mission and not just to the person of the leader. Okay, so this is the snapshot of the framework, of the leadership framework. 4 dimensions: the listening leader, to build a community; the reflective leader, to nourish the self of the leader; the discerning leader, to interpret the mission; and finally, the missioning leader, to inspire commitment to the mission. So that's the snapshot of the framework. So just to sort of summarize, no, Ignatian leadership as a result of this research, I would say, is a twofold servant leadership. The leader is not just a servant of the community, but also a servant of the mission. Okay. Secondly, Ignatian leadership is a twofold transformative leadership. The leader does not only transform or aims at the growth of the community, but also and more fundamentally, the growth of the leader's self. I think this is very Ignatian, very spiritual exercises. Okay. So, the aim of the book is to create a shared language for practitioners, so there'll be a shared understanding and a sharing of best practice. We invited Father General to post with the book, even if he never read it, because it helps sell books. Okay, so that's what's happening. Okay. Okay. So it'd be great to hear from you. Comments, reactions, questions.